The air on the orbital garden station was always a careful blend, a recipe of nitrogen and oxygen that Kellen had memorized down to the last part per million. It was his job, after all. To the Croth overseers, he was the atmospheric technician, a lowly human who understood the quirky, organic life support systems better than they ever cared to. To himself, he was a gardener, the last gardener of Exeter. He moved through the vast, silent biodomes, his boots whispering against the moss-covered pathways. All around him, the remnants of a beautiful world hung in suspended animation. Trees with leaves like spun silver dripped condensation onto flowers that pulsed with a soft, internal light. This was the heart of the station, a place the Croth kept operational for its propaganda value but fundamentally despised. It was life, untamed and delicate, and they were a race of cold, hard metal and conquest. It was in the deepest dome, the one designated for non-essential specimens, that Kellen found his true purpose. Hidden behind a waterfall that fell in slow-motion pearls was a panel he had modified himself. It didn't control the humidity or the light cycles for the plants. It monitored a different kind of cell. Her name was Anya. He had learned it from fragmented data logs. She was a Zalorian star weaver, an artist who could manipulate photonic energy into tapestries of living light. To her people, she was a spiritual leader, a creator of beauty. To the Croth, she was a battery. They had her locked in a stasis field that siphoned her innate energy, using it to power the station's central command nexus. They were draining her soul to fuel their oppression. Kellen first saw her not in person, but on his scuffed data slate, a flicker of biosigns and energy readings. But over the cycles, she became real. He watched her through the station's internal sensors, a figure of grace and defiance even in her translucent prison. Her skin had the faint luminescence of a nebula, and her long hair flowed around her like a captured night sky. Her eyes, when they were open, were the color of amethysts, and they held a deep, unyielding sorrow. He couldn't fight. He had no weapons, no army. He had trowels and nutrient solutions and a deep, patient understanding of how things grew. So he began to tend to her as he did his plants. He started small, rerouting minuscule amounts of power from non-critical systems to weaken the stasis fields. Efficiency by a fraction of a percent. It was a risk that made his hands shake, but he saw it as watering a parched seed. Weeks turned into months. His silent campaign was a war of inches. He learned the rhythms of the Croth patrols, the lazy complacency of the single guard assigned to the artifact. He began using the station's organic wiring living vines he had genetically coaxed to carry electrical currents to create a bypass. It was slow, painstaking work, hidden behind false panels and woven into the very foliage of the garden. One night, during a simulated planetary eclipse, he made his move. The main lights dimmed, and the bioluminescent plants glowed brighter, casting the dome in an ethereal blue light. This was his window. He accessed his hidden panel, his fingers flying across the interface. He initiated the sequence he had coded and tested 1,000 times in simulation. The living vines woven into the walls of the station began to pulse with energy, diverting power from the stasis field back into the garden's core. An alarm blared, sharp and electronic, but it was quickly drowned out by a different sound, the roar of the waterfall intensifying. As Kellen rerouted its pump to maximum, the sound covered everything. He slipped from his hiding place and ran to the containment chamber, a place he had only ever seen on a screen. The air crackled. The stasis field flickered, its golden hue turning unstable. And then, with a sound like shattering crystal, it failed. Anya collapsed forward, her legs unable to hold her. Kellen was there in an instant, catching her before she hit the cold floor. She was lighter than he expected, and cold, so cold. Her luminescent skin was dim. She looked up at him, her amethyst eyes wide with shock and confusion. They held no recognition, only fear. He was just another alien on this metal prison. "Shh," he whispered, his voice rough from lack of use. He supported her weight, one arm around her back. "It's all right. You're all right." He fumbled in his pocket and brought out a small, closed bud from a Zalorian sun blossom. It was the last one. He held it out to her. As her fingers, trembling, brushed against his, the bud reacted to her innate energy. It unfurled, its petals opening to reveal a core of warm, golden light. illuminating both their faces. In that soft, sudden glow, her fear melted away, replaced by a dawning, impossible understanding. She wasn't looking at a captor. She was looking at the quiet human who tended the plants, the one who had, for cycles, subtly shifted the light in her prison to mimic the Zalorian dawn, the one who had kept a piece of her world alive. She didn't speak his language, nor he hers, but as her hand closed over his, holding the sun blossom between them, a different kind of communication passed between them. It was a conversation of a shared glance, a grateful tear tracing a path through the stardust on her cheek, and the overwhelming, terrifying warmth that bloomed in Kellen's chest, a feeling he had long forgotten. Hope was a dangerous seed to plant, but as he helped her to her feet, ready to guide her into the hidden pathways of his garden, he knew it had already taken root. The engine room of the Croth mining barge World Breaker was a hell of noise and heat, a cavernous space where the air tasted of metal and burnt ozone. Here, the massive machinery that powered the ship and processed stolen planetary cores thrummed with a deafening, monotonous roar. And here, Rel worked. He was Cathari, a species known for their dense, stone-like hide and immense physical strength. The Croth had captured him from a frontier world, fitting him with a neural inhibitor collar that sent searing pain through his nervous system. If he slowed his work, he communicated not with words, but with the resonant, low-frequency hums that were the foundation of his people's language, a language the Croth were deaf to. To them, he was just another piece of machinery. His world was the rhythm of the pumps and the groan of the conveyors, until the day they brought her. She was human, small and seemingly fragile, her fiery red hair a shocking burst of color in the monochrome metal hell. Her name was Sina. She was a void singer, a navigator from a guild that charted courses through the cosmos by interpreting the subtle, gravitational songs and electromagnetic harmonies of space. The Croth, with their rigid logic, saw her art as a useless curiosity. When she refused to reveal the secret trade routes she knew, they threw her into a sonic dampening cage and hung it from the gantry above Rel's station. A warning and a torture, the cage did not just block sound. It absorbed it, creating a sphere of absolute silence. For Sina, whose entire being was attuned to vibration and resonance, it was a sensory void worse than any physical pain. Rel watched her from his console. He saw her press her hands against the bars, her mouth open in a silent scream, her body trembling from the lack of sensory input. He saw the vibrant light in her green eyes slowly dimming into despair. Something in Rel's stony heart cracked. He who lived by the vibrations of the world understood her torment on a fundamental level. Her silence was a wrong note in the symphony of his existence. He couldn't free her, not yet. The cage's lock was complex, and any tampering would alert the guards. But he could give her back her song. His plan was as silent as he was. Over the next few cycles, he began subtly altering the energy flow to the damping field generator. He didn't disable it. He modulated it, using his innate understanding of harmonic frequencies. He reprogrammed the field's parameters by rerouting power through a series of overloaded capacitors, creating a tiny, fluctuating leak in the silence. The first time it happened, Sina was slumped in the corner of her cage, nearly catatonic. A sound, faint and beautiful, pierced the absolute quiet. It was a single, pure note, the deep, resonant hum of the barge's primary power conduit. It lasted only a second before the silence swallowed it again. Her head snapped up. Hope, fierce and sudden, blazed in her eyes. Rhel, from his station below, saw her reaction. He picked up a heavy hydrospanner and struck a support beam in a specific, rhythmic pattern. Thrum-thrum-tap, thrum-thrum-tap. It was the Cathari heartbeat rhythm, a signal of solidarity. When the field flickered again, Sina was ready. She pressed her forehead against the bars and began to sing. It wasn't a song with words, but a cascade of pure, melodic tones that wove around the industrial noise, a counterpoint of beauty to the ugliness of their prison. Her voice, when it escaped the cage's grasp, was like liquid starlight. The other slaves in the engine room looked up, their movements faltering for a moment. The Croth guards, oblivious, noticed nothing but a slight increase in productivity. A clandestine duet began. Sina would sing, and Rel would answer, tapping out rhythms on pipes. altering the pitch of a plasma vent with a careful adjustment, his deep hums providing a bass line for her soaring melodies. They were composing a symphony of rebellion, a language of their own making. During one particularly beautiful exchange, a long, flowing aria from her answered by a complex, percussive rhythm from him, their eyes met across the noisy space. In that look, something more than gratitude passed between them, a deep, resonant understanding, a connection that vibrated at a frequency neither had known before. The day the pressure valve blew, chaos was their conductor. Superheated steam filled the room, and in the panic, the cage's control panel short-circuited. The damping field died completely. Cena's voice exploded into the room, a triumphant, powerful note of pure freedom that seemed to shake the very foundations of the barge. Rel didn't hesitate. He surged forward, ignoring the searing heat, and with his bare hands, he pried the cage door open. The metal groaning in protest, she leaped out, landing lightly before him. She was so much smaller up close, but the strength in her eyes was immense. "Thank you," she said, her voice hoarse from disuse but ringing with emotion. He couldn't form the words, but he didn't need to. He simply offered her his large, calloused hand. After a moment's hesitation, she placed her small one in his. The touch was electric, a connection more profound than any they had shared through sound. He led her into the steam-filled shadows, her song now a quiet, determined hum beside him. Their hands locked together as they fled into the labyrinth of service tunnels. Two musicians finally playing the same song. The archive on the Croth Command Station was a mausoleum for cultures. Row upon row of data crystals, artifacts, and biological samples sat in cold storage, stripped from worlds the Empire had consumed. Joran moved through the sterile, silent aisles, a data slate in his hand. He was a xenoarchivist, a preserver of knowledge. Now, the Croth had made him a grave robber. His task was to catalog the most valuable asset from the Siren homeworld, a living historian named Nema. The Siren did not record their history in books or data streams. They encoded it in the complex crystalline structures of their own bodies. Nema was a library, her very form containing the art, music, and collective memory of her entire civilization. The Croth saw her as the ultimate intelligence prize. They had her suspended in a neural extraction chamber, delicate filaments attached to her shimmering, opalescent skin, draining her memories bite by bite. The process was excruciating, a constant, low-grade agony that left her physically and spiritually depleted. Joran's job was to question her, to help the Croth decipher the cultural context of the data they were stealing. He sat across from her in the stark interrogation room. "State the significance of the Siren Harvest Festival," he said, his voice flat. Following his script, Nima looked at him, her eyes like pools of molten gold. There was no hatred in them, only a deep, weary sorrow. She remained silent. Frustration and something else, shame, bubbled in Joran's chest. He put the data slate down. He was tired of being a tool of erasure. On an impulse, he began to speak, not as an interrogator, but as a man. "On Earth," he said softly, "there's a place called the Redwood Forests. The trees are so tall they seem to hold up the sky. When you stand among them, the air smells of damp earth and pine, and the light falls in shattered pieces through the canopy." He wasn't looking at her, but at his own hands. "It's quiet, a deep, living quiet." He didn't know if she understood his words, but he continued. He told her about the sound of rain on a rooftop, the taste of salt from the ocean, the way a city looked at night from a great height, like a nest of fallen stars. He was sharing his own memories, offering them as a pathetic apology for the ones being stolen from her. When he finally risked a glance at her, he saw a single, shimmering tear trace a path down her crystalline cheek. It solidified into a tiny, perfect diamond upon touching the air. She reached out a slender, trembling hand and placed it on the table between them. The next day, he came back. This time, he didn't ask any questions. He simply talked. He described the feeling of grass under his feet. In return, Nima slowly, hesitantly, extended her consciousness towards his. It wasn't a voice in his head, but a flood of sensory information. He felt the warmth of a Siren sun on his skin, heard the harmonious, bell-like chorus of 1,000 voices singing as one, saw cities of iridescent crystal that grew from the ground like natural formations. He was experiencing her memories. She was sharing her world with him. A forbidden, intimate bond formed in that sterile room. He was no longer her jailer. He was her sole link to compassion. She was no longer a specimen. She was the most fascinating person he had ever met. During their sessions, he would subtly input corrupted data into the Croth system, protecting the most sacred of her memories. He found himself thinking of her golden eyes when he tried to sleep, of the way her light seemed to brighten when he entered the room. One day, the lead Croth overseer reviewed the extraction logs. "The core cultural memories are corrupted," it droned. "The asset is nearing the end of its viable data lifespan. Schedule it for recycling." Recycling, a cold, clinical term for murder. Joran's blood ran cold. He looked at Nima, who was watching him, her expression serene. She knew, that night, in his quarters, he accessed the station's mainframe. His clearance was limited, but his knowledge of Croth data architecture was now extensive. He found what he was looking for, a vulnerability in the network's emergency purge protocol. He began to write a virus, a simple, elegant piece of code that would, when triggered, cause a cascading system failure across every Croth system linked to the central nexus, including the power to Nima's prison and the life support for the entire archive wing. It was a suicide mission, but as he coded, he wasn't thinking of escape. He was thinking of the diamond tear she had shed, and the memory of a redwood forest he had given to her. He was going to give her one last thing, a choice. He would trigger the virus during their next session. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. Chaos, as it turned out, had a domino effect. Cullen's desperate bid to free Anya by overloading the Garden Station's life support didn't just blow out the stasis field. The power surge raced through the station's grid, finding a vulnerable data link to the Croth Central Command Network. At that exact moment, Joran, his finger hovering over the key that would unleash his virus, saw the alert on his data slate. A massive, unscheduled energy discharge from the Zalorian Garden Station. It was the perfect cover. He pressed the key. His virus piggybacked on Cullen's power surge, spreading through the Croth network like wildfire. On the World Breaker mining barge, every light flickered and died. For 3 full seconds, the ship was plunged into absolute darkness and silence, the great engines groaning to a halt. When the emergency lights flared on, Cena's sonic dampening cage was dark and silent, its field dead. At the same moment, the magnetic locks on the archive doors disengaged with a loud clunk. The first separate struggles for survival suddenly became one, on the Garden Station. Cullen and Anya stumbled through the malfunctioning biodomes. "The main hangar will be swarming," Cullen gasped, pulling Anya behind a tree with bark that glowed with frantic blue pulses. "We need another way out." Anya's amethyst eyes were wide, but not with fear, with focus. She placed her hands on the trunk of the tree. "The station. It speaks in light. The emergency systems are routing all power to the Croth barracks. But there is a secondary grid, a human one." She looked at Cullen. "Your shuttle. It has a manual override receiver. I can call it to us." She closed her eyes, and the light from her hands flowed into the tree, which began to pulse in a complex, rhythmic pattern. Throughout the garden, the bioluminescent plants responded, their gentle glows shifting into a frantic, coordinated sequence, a light-based signal pulsing through the station's very structure. Meanwhile, on the World Breaker, Rel and Cena didn't need words. He pointed to a service hatch leading to the auxiliary docking bay. She nodded, and they ran. They emerged into the bay to find a scene of panic. Croft guards were trying to manually override the airlock controls. Sitting there, amidst the chaos, was a small, agile courier ship. "Can you fly it?" Rel hummed, the vibration conveying the question. Cena's eyes scanned the ship's hull. "It's Croft design, but the core principles are universal. I just need to get to the cockpit." Back on the command station, Joran pried open the door to Nima's chamber. The extraction filaments had retracted. She was free, huddled on the floor. "Joran," she whispered, her voice a soft chime. "We have to go now," he said, helping her to her feet. Her hand in his was cool and solid, and it filled him with a strength he didn't know he possessed. They ran into the corridor just as a general evacuation alarm began to blare. Joran's virus had triggered an environmental containment warning dot in the Garden Station hangar. Kellen's battered shuttle, responding to Enya's photonic summons, suddenly powered up, its engines whining to life and scattering a group of confused Croth guards. In the World Breaker's docking bay, Sina, with Rel's help, had hot-wired the courier ship. The bay doors, their controls fried by the system crash, were stuck open. "Hold on," she yelled, firing the thrusters and shooting out into the void. And in the command station, Joran and Nema found an escape pod and launched, tumbling away from the stricken station dot for separate vessels. For pairs of fugitives found themselves in the same sector of space, Croth fighters now scrambling to pursue them all. It was Sina who opened a broad-range comms channel. "This is the stolen Croth vessel Whisper. I have one Cathari and one human on board, requesting coordinated escape vectors." A stunned silence, then Kellen's voice, laced with static, came through. "This is Shuttle Sunblossom, human and Zolorian. We read you." Joran's voice, breathless, followed. "Escape Pod 7, human and Siren. Our navigation is limited." "Then follow my lead," Sina said, her pilot's instincts taking over. "Rel, patch their signals into our navcom. I'm weaving us a song out of here." Using the gravitational pull of a nearby gas giant and the debris from the ongoing system failures, Sina plotted a chaotic, unpredictable course. The Whisper led, the Sunblossom, and the escape pod following its wake like ducklings. They were an alliance of gardeners and artists, archivists and engineers, bound by desperation and the fragile, new bonds of love that had freed them. They had turned their separate melodies into a chord, and that chord was now a song of rebellion. The free trader ship Kestrel was a welcome haven of controlled chaos, a sharp contrast to the sterile oppression of the Croth. On the bridge, Sina stood at the nav console, her fingers dancing across the star charts. "The Croth pursuit has broken off," she announced, a grin spreading across her face. "They've lost our trail in the nebula." Rel stood beside her, not at a separate station, but close, his large presence a steadying anchor. He placed a hand on the small of her back, a simple gesture that spoke volumes. The low, contented hum that rumbled in his chest was a private song, for her ears only. She leaned back into his touch, her own silent answer dot in the ship's small med bay, which doubled as a greenhouse. Kellen and Anya worked side by side. He had used cuttings from the Garden Station to start a new hydroponics tray. Anya knelt, her hands hovering over the young shoots. She didn't just weave light for art, she could channel it for life. A soft, warm glow emanated from her palms, and the Zolorian sun blossoms unfurled, their golden light filling the room. Kellen watched her, not the plants. The careful, reverent way she nurtured this new life mirrored the way he felt about her. She looked up and caught his gaze, a slow, beautiful smile gracing her features. He didn't need to say anything. He simply offered her his hand, and she took it, lacing her luminous fingers with his earthy, calloused ones dot in the quiet of the ship's archive nook. Joran and Nema sat together. He was showing her data slates filled with human history pictures of oceans, forests, and cities. She, in turn, was teaching him the Siren way of memory. She reached out and gently touched his temple. His mind was suddenly filled with not just the images of her world, but the emotions, the collective joy of a festival, the serene peace of a crystalline dawn, the profound love her people held for their history. It was more intimate than any kiss. When the connection faded, he was left breathless. "You are a part of our story now, Joran." She chimed softly. "Your memories are woven into mine." He looked at the small, diamond-like tear she had shed weeks ago, which he now kept in his pocket. "And you are a part of mine," he whispered. Weeks later, the Kestrel arrived at the coordinates Kellen had deciphered. From the Garden Station's logs, a hidden, terraformed moon in an unmapped system. As the ship broke through the atmosphere, a collective gasp filled the bridge. Below them lay a valley of breathtaking beauty. Rolling hills of emerald grass were dotted with trees that had leaves of silver and gold. A river of crystal-clear water wound its way through the landscape, and in the air, floating seeds like tiny lanterns drifted on the breeze. It was a sanctuary. They built their new home together. Kellen and Anya planted the first garden, a fusion of earth and Zolorian flora that bloomed with colors and lights never before seen. Rel, using his immense strength and innate understanding of structure, built their dwellings from the local stone, his work accompanied by the constant, happy hum of his people. Sina charted the skies, creating new stellar songs for this new world, her voice often joined by Rel's resonant harmonies. And Jorn and Nima became the keepers of their collective story, recording their journey in a new, joint history, one written in both data and living crystal. One evening, as the two suns set, painting the sky in hues of violet and gold, the six of them sat together on the porch of the main house. Kellen and Anya were curled together on a swing, her head on his shoulder. Rel had an arm around Sina, who was quietly singing a new melody. Jorn held Nima's hand, her light pulsing gently in the twilight. They were a gardener and a star weaver, an engineer and a pilot, an archivist and a historian. They were from different worlds, freed not by a soldier's gun, but by the unexpected, profound power of connection. The alien overlords had been bewildered by how one human could free a planet, but they had been looking for the wrong kind of strength. They had underestimated the power of a shared song, a gifted memory, a caring touch, and in doing so, they had allowed a new kind of garden to grow, not in sterile orbital stations, but among the free stars, a garden built on the most resilient foundation of all, love.